From Bihar to UP, West Bengal, Haryana, Madhya Pradesh to Telangana, the Agnipath fire is spreading. Buses have been burnt, trains torched and roads blocked. Police stations and homes of political leaders have been targeted. You're seeing just some of the pictures of the mayhem that was unleashed today. Angry protesters are demanding a rollback in Agnipath a day after the upper age limit of the recruitment scheme to the armed forces was increased from 22 to 23 years for this year. But I also want to play out for you this set of visuals. Visuals of these children inside a school bus in Darbhanga in Bihar. They are stuck because protesters have blocked the roads. Just take a look at these visuals. You can see young children crying. They don't know what's happening. They're looking out of the window. They're crying because they don't know when they'll get home. Is there any justification to these kind of protests which harass citizens of this country, which destroy property? Well, obviously the answer is a resounding no. But we will be only skimming the surface if we restrict our coverage today to the shock value of these pictures. We need to ask a few questions. Who are these people that are so angry that they want to destroy public property? Now, one youth who was aspiring to join the armed forces has even reportedly committed suicide. Is this all an opposition sazish, or is there more to the story? Here are 7 clear reasons for the protest. 1. The Agnipath scheme essentially finishes the guarantee of a 17-year tenure in the armed forces if you are selected. That means no pension, no benefits if you aren't part of the 25% that make it to a full tenure. That's the problem these protesters have. What are the job prospects if Agniveer does not make it to a full tenure? That's the big question mark. Now, another issue being raised is the All India, all-class recruitment system, which has caused concern because people are asking, will this mean less opportunity for some sections? Where is the job security after the 4-year tenure is over? This is the question which has seen a response in terms of some states saying that you will get priority in, state police forces and other paramilitary forces, etc. And then some key issues. The strong desire for a secure, lifelong government job is also behind these protests to a large degree. Let's admit it. A large number of Indians see these jobs as a right, an entitlement, and truly the only way to uplift themselves. That is also behind this anger. The lack of employment opportunities for Indian youth is another glaring reason we can't ignore. Let's look at this last point in a bit of detail. In 2021, 1.5 crore students passed their class 12 exam. So, around the age of eligibility for the Agnipath, the lower end of it, 17 and a half. Now, as per 2018 data, there was a total of close to 80 lakh students who had passed undergraduate and graduate courses and would be looking for jobs. So, 64.7 lakh students in 2018 for undergraduate courses and about 15 lakh students for graduate courses. So, these are people who are looking for jobs. How many jobs are there? As of March 2020, there are close to 41 lakh sanctioned posts in the central government. I'm talking about central government jobs right now. Now, 22% of these, so around 10 lakhs, are vacant. These are obviously not jobs for all beginners who are graduates, undergraduates. This is the total vacancy. The total vacant posts in the defense services as of now are around 1,22,555. Here, I've added up all the 3 defense forces. So let me look at the army. Officer level posts are 7,476. Non-officer level posts are 97,177. This is data as of December 2021. Likewise, for the Navy, 1,265 officer level posts. 11,166 non-officer level posts. Obviously, Agniveers are not going to be eligible for the officer level posts. This is the Air Force numbers, 4,850 non-officer level posts. So, if I add all of that up, it's about 1,22,000. The largest government employer, by the way, is the Indian Railways, and they have a total of 12 lakh employees overall. Remember the ruckus in Jan this year when a railway recruitment was called off? Again, trains were burnt. That anger spilled out onto the streets. So clearly, there aren't enough government jobs. Meanwhile, let's look at unemployment figures in India. And I'm relying on CMIE data. It's considered the gold standard in the private space for unemployment numbers. The latest data for May is 7.1% is the unemployment rate. And it's actually an improvement over pandemic years, but displays how deep the trouble is. I also want to pull up one more data set for you. Unemployment in states where most of the protests have taken place. So again, CMIE data in Bihar shows 13.3% unemployment in the month of May. Now look at this May 2020 figure. This is 46%. Now this is important because this is during the pandemic. Obviously things have improved since the pandemic, but this is a pain that is still spilling over, which is why when you're seeing all of those pictures today of the burning and the rioting, you have to understand that what the pandemic has done to people's ability to be employed. In UP, by the way, that figure at the height of pandemic was 20.4. It's dropped to 3.4. That's better than the average of the country. There could be a reason of this, that it's a highly agricultural state. In Rajasthan, the number is a high 22%. This is all May this year's numbers that I'm talking about. In Telangana, it's 9.4%. So we're essentially seeing an unemployment issue playing out in this violent fashion. That seems pretty clear. But what really are the solutions? Yamini Aiyar, President CPR India, is joining us on the show today. I'm speaking with Tushar Gupta, Senior Editor at Swarajya magazine. And I'm also joined by Shivam Yadav. He's an army aspirant from Kanpur. I'm going to take a few minutes to speak with Shivam. Shivam, आपको आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
जी आ रही।
शिवम, हमें समझाइए कि लोग नाराज है अग्निपथ को लेकर, लेकिन सरकार समझा रही है कि इस साल के लिए 23 साल तक उम्र का अपर लिमिट बढ़ा दिया गया है। मौके भी मिलेंगे अग्निवीरों को अगर वो पूरी तरह से आर्म्ड फोर्सेस में नहीं जाएंगे। तो क्या कारण है इतने आक्रोश का?
ये जो 4 साल का यही कारण है। ये 4 साल वाले को ज्यादा दिन, मतलब ज्यादा साल तक रखना चाहिए।
नहीं, रखना चाहिए तो ठीक है, लेकिन
हाँ।
नहीं, लेकिन अगर आप 4 साल के बाद आपको पूरी तरह से आर्मी या नेवी या एयरफोर्स में नौकरी नहीं मिलती है, तो आपको 11.5 लाख रुपए भी तो मिल रहे हैं। आपको ट्रेनिंग मिली है 4 साल की।
तो रुपए क्या करेंगे रुपए का? उसके बाद फिर बेरोजगार हो जाएगा ना।
तो इसका मतलब है कि ट्रेन फूंक देंगे, बस फूंक देंगे?
नहीं, हिंसा करना तो गलत है। शांतिपूर्वक मतलब आंदोलन कर सकते हैं।
तो बेरोजगार आप हो जाएंगे तो क्या इसकी जिम्मेदारी पूरी तरह से सरकार की है? 4 साल के बाद अगर आपको 11.5 लाख रुपए मिलते हैं, आपको ट्रेनिंग मिलती है, आपको प्रायोरिटी मिलती है कुछ नौकरियों में, तो उसके बाद तो खुद को संभालना आपकी जिम्मेदारी नहीं बनती है? या जैसे मैं आपकी कह रही हूँ, तो मतलब जो लोग आज प्रोटेस्ट कर रहे हैं उनकी बात कर रही हूँ।
बनती है, लेकिन मतलब जो पहले था वही सही था। मतलब उसके बाद पेंशन मिलती थी, फिर उसके बाद हम लोग कहाँ जाएंगे? मतलब सबको तो रोजगार मिल नहीं जाएगा।
नहीं, वैसे भी सबको रोजगार कैसे मिलेगा? अगर पहले जैसा ही सिस्टम भी होता है तो जितने लोग हैं इस देश में जिनको नौकरियां चाहिए, सब तो आर्मी और एयरफोर्स और नेवी में नहीं भर्ती हो सकते हैं।
हाँ, तो जिनके पास योग्यता है वो तो भर्ती हो जाएंगे, लेकिन उसके 4 साल बाद तो जरूरी थोड़ी ना है कि मतलब छूट मिली।
शिवम, आपकी दिक्कत क्या है ये मैं समझने की कोशिश कर रही हूँ। क्या लोगों को उकसाया जा रहा है कि इस तरह के प्रोटेस्ट करें?
प्रोटेस्ट के लिए उकसाया किसी को नहीं जा रहा है। वैसे तो बच्चे खुद जा रहे हैं अपना, क्योंकि उनको पूरा चाहिए। मतलब 4 साल वाली नहीं चाहिए, जो पहले था वही चाहिए। और जिनका एग्जाम था वो भी कैंसिल हो गया है।
तो एग्जाम कैंसिल हो गया, इसके लिए 22 से 23 साल तक कर दी है, 21 से 23 साल तक कर दी है एज लिमिट।
तो वो तो इसी साल है ना। उसके बाद फिर जो अभी बाहर हो जाएगा वो फिर कहाँ से दौड़ेगा? मतलब कहाँ से?
ओके, ठीक है, थैंक यू शिवम। आप रहिए हमारे साथ, लेकिन शुक्रिया आपकी बात समझाने के लिए। यामिनी अय्यर इज जॉइनिंग अस, सो इज तुषार गुप्ता। यामिनी, is there a way to make sense of what is happening? Of course, the violence is completely condemnable. You can't justify it in any way. But are you seeing a bigger problem playing out here?
Absolutely. I think, and I think there are two parts to this problem. One part of the problem, I think, is specific to the particular nature of the reform itself, specific to the armed forces. We must remember that the bulk of recruitment into the armed forces takes place out of about 150 districts in this country. And there are young people who have spent a large part of their youth preparing themselves in the hope of social mobility through access into these armed forces. So a decision of this nature fundamentally shifts their potential possible pathways for social mobility, for employment, for job security. And that inevitably is going to create a certain kind of insecurity without effective alternatives presented to them and without a deeper consultation and understanding of the implications of this reform for their individual lives, their professional identities, their social standing, and their possibilities for their future lives. That gets integrated, I think, with the larger challenge of how the Indian economy has grown since we were actually entered onto the path of liberalization in 1991. It's a well-known fact that our growth path has rested much more on the servicification of the Indian economy rather than building a structural transformation that goes from agriculture to off-farm employment in the form of manufacturing, with services driving one part of the economy. As a consequence, we have consistently dealt with this challenge of jobless growth. We dealt with it in the peak heydays of our economic growth of the 2000s. And as growth slowed down and the trickle-down consequences of growth started reducing, it has got exaggerated and exacerbated. And therefore, there's very little opportunities for the young of India who've gone through education. We are also a country that is at the cusp of a huge demographic dividend. We have a large number of young people looking for employment and future possibilities of social mobility, but we have an economy that's simply not built pathways for this for leveraging this demographic dividend. And therefore, you end up in a context where the government job and the social security that government jobs provides you, alongside with the social mobility that job provides you, being the only option that many young people have, and a politics that is generated around it. We've seen that in the violence you mentioned of the railways. We've seen that now in the reaction to Agnipath. Lastly, I think we must also remember that we are in a particularly toxic moment in our politics, where we have seen a sort of benign neglect of a lot of violence that has come about over the last many years and more seriously in the last few months. Only last week, we were treated to newspaper headlines with images of bulldozers. So violence has entered into our everyday politics and our everyday life that in many ways relies on young men. And therefore, it is almost inevitable when their employment chances are further jeopardized that those forms of protest will lead itself to deeper violence. We've unleashed that genie for political purposes, and then it comes out in other forms, as we are seeing in these horrific images that you're showing on screen. So a particular peculiarity of what armed forces means and security of jobs in the armed forces means for one bulk of India's population that have historically come into the armed forces with a sudden band-aid being pulled out, an economic transition path that doesn't build jobs for the masses, and it's a problem that we have consistently across political regimes chosen to ignore, and a politics that encourages violence that has led us to where we are today.
So a three-pronged reasoning that Yamini has given. Tushar, where would you stand on this? And again, I preface by saying that, violent protests and torching buses and trains just absolutely makes no sense. But did this scheme fail to take into account the extent of dependence that a large number of Indian youth have on these government jobs and on these armed forces jobs?
Tamanna, beyond the whole political rhetoric, which many parties on the ground have been talking about, oh, there is unemployment, so there is violence, there's no correlation between the two. If today someone is unemployed or someone is unable to land a secure or a stable job, does it mean they'll go around damaging public property? Absolutely not. Now, I'll break down some of the points raised by Shivam here and also by Yamini. He says that the time period should be increased from 4 to 8 years. It doesn't make any sense. Why they want to increase it to 8 years? They want to come into the army at 17, leave at 25 or 28. That will even dent their prospects even further. Right now, they're coming in for 4 years. They exit at 4 years, if at all. The success rate in Agnivir, by the way, is 25%. Even if for every 4 people who join the Agnipath program, 1 person will make it to the final. That's 25%, Tamanna. In UPSC, the success rate is 0.001%. Look at the comparison.
Just one sec. Just one sec. I'll let you complete. I'll let you complete. Please. I'll let you complete fully. I just want to talk about that 25% and why that's perhaps a false equivalence, because you're comparing it to UPSC. But pre-Agnipath, if you got selected, you had a 100% chance of making it through. So it's gone from 100% to 25%.
No. At the end, the people who are enrolled in this program is also increasing. And fine, even if I say the argument that 25% are making, the other 75 are not left in the lurch. They are being given the skill certificates. They have been specially designed courses by the IGNOU, which can help them pursue their education. Tell me how many graduates in India, on an average, exit their colleges at the age of 21 to 22 with 12 lakh rupees in their hand, with skill certificates in their hands, with experience and exposure worth 4 years in their hands. Not many, not at all. The whole talk, Tamanna, it boils down to just 2 things. One is the pension. The protesters today, apart from those who are not politically motivated, they want pension for 40 to 50 years of their life for 4 years of service. Tell me, how is it justified? Tell me, how is it justified? You had one of your guests saying, "Baad mein to berozgar ho jayenge." Arey, kaise berozgar ho rahe? How are you getting unemployed? The government is saying, we are giving you 12 lakh rupees, which is a good enough amount. If one wants to start pursuing higher education, even move out of the country for that matter, they can put some resources together. They can further pursue a diploma. They can go back to study for any government exam they want to. It's not like they're debarred from taking any government exam. They can go back, appear for the CDS. They can go and take the entry to the armed forces to the SSB route. That's the first problem. The problem is they want a pension for 40, 50 years for 4 years of service. The second part is about the job security. Tamanna, we had the pandemic in 2020. We are entering a slowdown now. You're seeing how the markets are. People will be unemployed in the long run. People will face salary cuts. Terrible things will happen on the economic front. That's how the world works. Now, are we telling that people in the private sector are not driven? There were experts saying, 4 years is not enough to find some driven and motivated individuals. What sort of an argument is that? Okay. You and I are part of the private sector. Aren't we motivated? Do we stop working, or do we protest because there is no pension? There are other things to the life than pension itself. That's my second thing. Okay. The third part, the last part is, what will people do after the age of 21 or 25, assuming they join the Agnipath program at 21? You have 12 lakh rupees in your hand, which is a huge thing. Most engineering graduates in India or MBA graduates in India exit college with nothing but a loan to themselves. Look at what's happening in the US. We are telling the students here, okay, fine, you did not make the final cut, that's all right. We are giving you access to credit, start a business. And this whole taunt about, they'll end up as security guards, what kind of an elitism is that? They might enter into a business, they might enter into logistics, they'll see so much in those 4 years, they might enter into any field.
Tushar, but you're responding to a lot of points that have not necessarily been made on this discussion. I know you're, putting everything together and responding into it, but I want to take some of your points to Shivam, if he's still with us. Shivam, aapko awaaz aa rahi hai hamari? All right, we'll try and get him back because he's on a poor WhatsApp line. Yamini, now the question of whether this is an unemployment issue or not. Tushar has laid out some points about why the protests don't make sense, according to him, but we're not going into the merits or demerits of Agnipath today. We're asking the simple question about whether this is linked to a larger employment issue. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, I think there's no question it is linked to a larger unemployment issue, and it's it is exacerbated by the vulnerabilities of COVID. But this is a long-term challenge of India's economic trajectory, and I think it's about time that we wake up and recognize it. We are an economy that set itself on a growth path on the back of a service economy rather than a manufacturing economy. We are an economy where the bulk of employment still comes from agriculture, but agriculture contributes the least to India's GDP. We are in an economy that is largely informal, where in fact social security is completely unavailable to the bulk of India. We saw that in the harshest of ways after the 4-hour unexpected lockdown that was announced, and the bulk of India's workers had to walk on their feet from their cities to their homes because they do not have social security, and their incomes are so low that they can barely survive a week without being employed. So we are not talking about people like Tushar and me who have job security of different kinds, who have skills that are easily marketable, that can get high-end service jobs in the private sector. We are talking about ordinary people who have been given a rubbish education because we haven't effectively invested well in our public education system. 50% of India's children that finish 5 years of schooling can barely read a standard 2 textbook. They go through college. A smaller proportion of them go through college with relatively unemployable degrees, which is why you have the gap between skilled employment and college graduates. And essentially, you've got a context in which there are very few jobs available, which is why India has one of the lowest labor force participation rates. Not only CMIE data tells us this, the government's own PLFS data tells us this. In 2019, before the lockdown,
just a counter question here. Just a counter question here.
More people move from services to agriculture. There is an employment problem. I don't think we can shy away from that.
Okay, but does this mean that the government has to be the guarantor of employment forever and ever?
The government can never be the guarantor of employment. India's government actually employs only about 3% of India's workforce. So of course, it's not a solution to the employment problem. However, when the government is not willing to recognize the employment challenge and create an enabling environment for enhancing individual productivity, government becomes the employer of first resort rather than the employer of last resort. When the government comes up with schemes such as this, which completely upend without consultation, without identifying pathways, and frankly, without clearly explaining why they need to do this in the first place, people's only source of employment, you are naturally going to end up creating a lot of vulnerability. So this is, to me, violence is, of course, not something that can be condoned. It's deeply worrying, but this violence is a symptom of a much larger problem. It is a symptom of an economy that hasn't taken its people seriously, has not built human capital, of a politics that encourages violence when it suits them, and therefore you will find this genie coming out of the bottle even in inconvenient moments like this.
शिवम, आपको आवाज आ रही है मेरी अब? तो थोड़ी देर पहले जो बोला गया, तुषार गुप्ता जी हमारे पैनल पर है, उन्होंने कहा कि 4 साल के बाद अगर 11.5 लाख रुपए किसी को मिलते हैं तो वो किसी भी इंजीनियर ग्रेजुएट से भी ज्यादा पूंजी बन जाती है। उस दिशा में उस समय पर बेरोजगारी की चिंता करके आज प्रोटेस्ट करने का क्या मतलब है, ये उनका सवाल है आपसे शिवम।
प्रोटेस्ट क्या, अब 4 साल जो दौड़ेगा और 4 साल के लिए नौकरी करेगा क्या? केवल 4
No, that line's very poor. The line's very poor. We can't understand what he's saying.
Tamanna.
Yeah, we'll try and get him back. Tushar, the question is, when you are comparing a protester, or say a Shivam today, or any of these people protesting to an engineering graduate, or if you're comparing them, you'd give the example of you and me in the private sector. We know that there is no pension, there's no gold watch at the end of it. None of that is happening. We live in a world where, you enter a career and you end 25 years later, even that doesn't happen. But are we similarly skilled than all of these people protesting? Are we actually do we actually have the same benefits? Are we on the same level playing field, Tushar?
Yamini made some excellent points, Tamanna. She said about India's workforce, where government is not just employing 3% of them, where we have been always a service-based economy. That's more the reason the kids who are protesting today should not look at the government as a source of income. Shivam here says that 4 saal baad kya karenge? The question is, if you're coming out of school with no employable skills, with no prospects whatsoever, why would you turn down an opportunity for 4 years to be a part of such an elite force where you can acquire so many skills that can be helpful for your lifetime? It would depend on the merit from person to person. One person may exit the Agnipath program, pursue an MBA. We don't know from an IM. One person may start a small business. It's up to them as an individual. But if your prospects are so low, if you say your level playing ground is not equal to ones in the urban areas, why would you say no to such an opportunity? And to add to what Yamini said,
of entitlement,
right.
isn't it? Tushar, I want to ask you this question, and I want to ask Yamini this question. At the end of this, what we're not talking about is the sense of entitlement. And
Absolutely,
perhaps entitlement is not necessarily the right word, but the understanding that the sarkar is the my baap, will give me the job, will give me the pension.
No. Tamanna, may I just make a correction here?
One by one. Okay, let Yamini...
Tamanna, it is indeed entitlement. It is indeed entitlement because you heard Shivam say. He said 4 साल बाद बेरोजगार हो जाएंगे, 11 लाख रुपए का क्या करेंगे? I mean, the point is, why do they want the government to feed them for life? The government is saying, come over, we'll teach you how to fish. But these people want to fish for each month for the rest of their life.
Okay, Yamini's response to that. Yamini's response to that.
I find this line of argument that Tushar is pursuing deeply problematic because it is incumbent on the government, any government, to create an environment which enables productivity. Public sector is never a substitute for private markets, but public sector plays a very, very important role in creating an enabling market for that enabling environment for the average citizen to participate in that private market. That means we need to invest in people's health, we need to invest in people's education, we need to invest in an environment which creates jobs, which creates social security.
Precisely.
We need to provide for social security, which our governments across political parties have not done. That is why we are at this pass today. People have always sought government jobs not as an entitlement. That's an extremely, extremely obnoxious upper class word to use, not as an entitlement, but as the only option for security of jobs, because we do not have a robust social security system or a robust welfare state in this country. The fact that our youth is in the state that they are, and that Shivam is giving you these arguments that he is giving you, is because our markets have not actually worked for the bulk of India. Our economy hasn't worked for the bulk of India. That's what we should humbly accept as upper class people who have had the opportunities that we have and who are earning so well that without social security, we still have enough pension for ourselves going forward to ensure that there's food on our plate and we can educate our children. Let's be clear about what we are talking about. The average middle class income for India is about 15,000 rupees a month, not 15 lakhs. Let's be clear.
Okay, your response.
More the reason they should not turn down a job which is paying them 20,000 a month. More the reason. You're telling me that the average income for a middle class family is 15,000
middle class,
rupees a
not
month.
the poor. Middle class, not the poor.
So
Poor is even
why
lower.
would you turn
It's
down?
2,000
Why would you
rupees.
turn down the opportunity?
No, they're not turning
Yamini,
it down.
my simple question
They're not
is-
turning it down.
They're
They're
asking
saying
for
that we want
majority.
what we had before. They're saying we want what we had before. They're not turning it down. They're saying we want more.
Exactly.
I will still, Tamanna, I will still call it entitlement because the crux of the matter is they want a pension. The entire crux of the argument, and I've been following this all day today, is that we are going to be here for 4 years. Why are you not giving us a pension? Tell me, I agree with Yamini that the state should invest in capacity where jobs can be created. It needs to enable an atmosphere
As
where
I
jobs
wrap
can
this
be
discussion,
created.
1 minute. As I wrap this discussion, let me take you to the question that matters, which is beyond the use of the word entitlement. Yamini thinks it's elitist. It's not taking into consideration what, so many Indians have suffered and the opportunities they've not got. Tushar says they have no business protesting. Let me just fast forward to the real big problem. As we move ahead and the gig kind of a situation pervades to all jobs, as AI, as technology starts replacing more and more human jobs, what are you going to do with these lakhs and lakhs of young Indians who don't know how to do much and are not skilled? Who's going to employ them? At that point, Tushar, what's going to happen? And will the government have to essentially come in? Remember the plan of universal basic income, which everyone poo-pooed. You have to think of where is the solution here? Is the solution cutting down the government's bill? That's my question.
Tamanna, of course, these questions are always asked. When the computer first came in, people who were stenographers and typewriters, they also asked this question. But internet created an economy of its own. I'll give you the example of farm laws. I was strongly backing those laws because they would have created new jobs in the areas of cold storage, warehousing, logistics, transport, and whatnot. So every time there is a churn within the technologies that are there, within the industry itself, new opportunities open up. And tomorrow with AI, with machine learning, with big data, a lot of new opportunities will open up. But the people need to have an open mind for that. The
Shivam
important
is
part
not
is the
understanding
aspirants
what
need to
is
have an open
AI.
mind.
I mean, his WhatsApp connection is not working. You're going to tell him that don't worry about this because AI is going to give you new opportunities. I'm just saying, is there a very wide chasm between what is happening and the ground reality and how we understand it? Yamini, just quick word from you and then I have to wrap.
Just where you mentioned in your last comment about government fisc, and I think that's at the heart of this. There is a political economy around the one rank, one pension, and there is a political economy around the fisc that feeds into this contracting out in some senses of the army, so of the militaries, of the armed forces. So this is, I think, at the heart of the issue. The problem that is being solved here is not one of HR, of government, or of employment. It is a fiscal problem that is being solved that has massive social and economic repercussions that needs to be understood. The political economy of this decision is very different from the political economy of unemployment, which I think is one of the factors that is very visible in the protests that we see on the streets.
Well, the fact is that the fiscal problem and the ballooning pension bill is an issue that's not going to go away. Even if Agnipath is softened or rolled back, you can't just keep kicking that problem down the can. So there are bigger issues at stake here. Thank you so much, Tushar and Yamini, of course, for joining us on the show. We hope this has added clarity to our viewers who've joined in today. But as I wrap up this section and this discussion, I want to play out for you sound clip from 2018 from the late CDS, Bipin Rawat, who at one point had talked about the Agnipath scheme and what he had to say to people who think of the armed forces as just a job.
अक्सर देखा गया है कि लोग भारतीय सेना को एक एम्प्लॉयमेंट का जरिया मानते हैं, नौकरी हासिल करने का जरिया। मैं आपको एक चेतावनी देना चाहूँगा कि ये गलतफहमी अपने दिमाग से दूर निकाल दीजिए। भारतीय सेना एक नौकरी का जरिया नहीं है। अगर आपने भारतीय सेना में शामिल होना है तो आपको शारीरिक और मानसिक रूप से हर तरीके से आपको मजबूती दिखानी है। आपका हौसला बुलंद होना चाहिए। आपको कठिन से कठिन समस्याओं का सामना करने के लिए आप में ताकत होनी चाहिए। जहां रास्ता नहीं निकल सकता वहां रास्ता ढूंढने की काबिलियत होनी चाहिए। तभी आप सही भारतीय सेना के जवान कहलाए जाएंगे। ये नौकरी का जरिया नहीं है। क्योंकि अक्सर मेरे पास कई नौजवान आते हैं कि सर मुझे भारतीय सेना में नौकरी चाहिए। मैं उन्हें यही बोलता हूं कि भारतीय सेना नौकरी का साधन नहीं है। नौकरी लेनी है तो रेलवेज में जाइए, पीएनटी में जाइए और बहुत से जरिए हैं। अपना ओन बिजनेस खोल लीजिए। अगर भारतीय सेना में आना है तो कठिनाइयों का सामना करने के लिए आपको काबिल होना पड़ेगा। आपको मानसिक और शारीरिक रूप से काबिल होना पड़ेगा।